Oh, it's so great to be with you guys. Garrett, thank you so much. I've been reading about your leadership and your voice, and I'm very honored that you've been with us this afternoon to introduce me, and thank you for your work. You know, I spoke to a few of the folks who are outside. I guess the fire marshal's not letting some people in. Lucky us, no, I'm joking. But speaking to the folks outside, you know, one of the things I said is, in the history of our country, I think some of the most significant advances that we've made, some of the most significant change that we have made in our movement towards social justice and equality and just progress. Some of the most significant work we have ever done has been prompted and fueled by the students of America. And yet again, you are doing it. You are doing it. And I cannot thank you enough. You know, I often talk about the circumstances of my birth. My parents met when they were graduate students at UC Berkeley back in the civil rights movement. And, you know, I joke, me and my sister joke, we grew up surrounded by a bunch of adults who spent full time marching and shouting about this thing called justice. Your kids are going to say the same thing about you guys. And that's how the cycles continue. So I'm so honored and pleased and happy to be with all of you today, the leaders who are in the room of every age and every stripe. So thank you for this. So I'm going to share with you a few of the thoughts about our campaign and what's happening around the country. And then we're going to pass around a mic because I would love to hear from everyone here. Because I will tell you, I fully intend to win this election. But a measure of success for me is also that at the end of this process, that we will be relevant and relevant in the lives of the people we serve. And one of the only ways that I believe that we can make sure that happens is that we listen as much, if not more, than we talk. So I'll be passing around a mic for everyone because I'd love to hear from you. But I'll share with you just a little of my thoughts. So we announced our campaign several weeks ago in the place of my birth, the place called Oakland, California. We were hoping we'd have a few thousand people, and about 22,000 of our best friends showed up, so that was kind of nice. And as you guys can imagine, during the course of the process, people have been asking, why are you running? Why are you running? And so I share with them. There are actually a number of reasons. One of them has to do with what I think everyone here knows. We are at an inflection point in the history of our country. This is a moment in time that is requiring us each as individuals and collectively to look in a mirror and ask a question. That question being, who are we? And I think what we all know is that part of the answer to that question is we are better than this. We are better than this. So this is a moment that is requiring us then to fight for the best of who we are. I think of this also as being a moment that requires that anyone who purports or wants to be a leader must fight to restore the importance of truth and justice in our country. And anyone who thinks of themselves as a leader must also fight to restore equal opportunity for all people in our country to succeed. So those are some of the reasons I'm running. And then I guess there's a very personal reason. My sister Maya and I were raised by a mother who was all of 5 feet tall. But if you had ever met our mother, you would have thought she was 7 feet tall. And our mother was the kind of parent who, if you ever came home complaining about something, the first thing she'd do is look at you and say, so what are you going to do about it? So I decided to run for president of the United States. There you go. There you go. So let's talk a little bit more about the importance of truth and justice. So certainly in these last 2 years and several months, we've been talking about truth, mostly in the context of truth versus untruth. But I'd ask that we also consider another context, which is this. Right now in our country, there are a lot of people who rightly feel a great sense of distrust in their government, its institutions, and leaders. And the thing about a relationship of trust is, by its very nature, a relationship of trust is reciprocal. You give and you receive trust. And one of the most important ingredients in trust is truth. But there's a funny thing about truth. Speaking truth can often make people quite uncomfortable. And for those of us who speak often behind a microphone or behind a podium, there is an incentive that we will engage in happy talk, that we will make everyone feel lovely, we will sprinkle lovely dust all over the room, people will applaud, and job will have been done. Well, speaking truth doesn't always accomplish that goal. But here's the other thing about speaking truth. Yes, people may walk away from that conversation thinking, you know, I didn't particularly like what I had to hear. But they will also walk away from that conversation knowing it was an honest conversation. So I believe this is a moment in time where we must speak truth. So now you all are looking at me, okay, Kamala, so what are some of the truths you have in mind? Well, I will share a few of them with you. If Charlottesville didn't make it clear, if the Tree of Life Synagogue did not make it clear, racism, anti-Semitism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia are real in this country, and we must speak these truths. And in speaking that truth, we must acknowledge that they are born out of hate, hate which over the last couple of years has received new fuel. We must agree that whenever and wherever that hate presents itself, we must all speak out, speak up, and we must agree that whoever is the target of that hate, they should never be made to fight alone. Let's speak that truth. Let's speak that truth. Let's speak truth. The economy of America is not working for working people. Now, how do we know that? Well, in our country today, for almost half of American families cannot afford a $400 unexpected expense. $400. That could be the car breaking down. That could be a hospital bill folks didn't see coming. $400 unexpected expense will completely topple that family. In America today, in 99% of the counties of our country, if you are a minimum wage worker working full-time, you cannot afford market rate for a one-bedroom apartment. In our country last year, 12 million people borrowed on average $400 from the payday lender at an interest rate often above 300%. These are the truths about what is going on in our country today, which is why, as president, I will reform the tax code, and specifically what I propose is that for families that are making less than $100,000 a year, they will receive a $6,000 tax credit a year that they can receive at up to $500 a month, which will represent all the difference between them being able to get through the end of the month or not. And it's an interesting thing because, first of all, I'll tell you that the economists that are talking about it are talking about the fact that this would be the most significant middle-class tax cut we'll see in generations. What we know is that this will lift up 1 in 2 American families, 2 in 3 American children. But then, of course, you all can imagine there are the others who will present a question. Well, how are you going to pay for it? Well, I will tell you how we're going to pay for it. On day 1, we're going to repeal that tax bill that benefited the top 1% and the biggest corporations of America. That's how we're going to pay for it. That's how we're going to pay for it. Let's speak truth. We are a society that pretends to care about education, but not so much the education of other people's children. So I've been traveling our country. I've been meeting with teachers all over our country who are working 2, sometimes 3 jobs to pay the bills. 94% of the teachers in our country teaching in public schools come out of their own pocket to pay for school supplies. I'm going to tell you, my first grade teacher, Mrs. Frances Wilson, God rest her soul, attended my law school graduation. We all have some kind of similar story, many of us do, right? Of that teacher that just convinced us we were special. We weren't particularly special, but we believed them. And it put us on a path to be in a place, in an educational institution such as this, where we might be making decisions about who will be the next president of the United States. Let's be clear. There are 2 groups of people raising our children. Parents, often with the assistance of grandparents and aunties and uncles, and our teachers. But we are not paying them their value when we know that teachers in our country on average make 10% less than similarly college-educated professionals. Which is why, as president, I will implement what will be the first time in our nation a federal investment in closing that teacher pay gap. So that gap on average, and actually also here in New Hampshire as well, that gap is effectively on average $13,500 a year. So let's be clear about $13,500 a year. $13,500 a year in most places in our country represents a year's worth of mortgage payments. $13,500 a year is a year's worth of grocery bills. $13,500 a year puts a significant dent in student loan debt. And to make a fine point on this, I firmly believe that you can judge a society based on how it treats its children. And one of the greatest expressions of love that a society can extend toward its children is to invest in their education, and by extension, that means investing in their teachers. Let's speak truth. Let's speak truth. Healthcare and access to healthcare should be a right to which everyone receives, and not a privilege of just those who can afford it, which is why I support Medicare for all. Because let's be clear, in our country today, there are far too many people who do not have access to the care that can help alleviate their pain or save their lives, simply because they don't have enough money in their pocket. That is immoral, and it is something we can fix, but we have got to have a commitment to do the right thing and understand this will be a reflection of who we are and what our values are as a nation. Let's speak truth. Let's speak truth. Climate change is real. Now, honestly, guys, isn't it kind of sad I had to say it that way? And you know why I did? Because there are supposed leaders in Washington, D.C. on this subject, which represents an existential threat to who we are as a species. But yet these supposed leaders are busy pushing science fiction instead of science fact, and it will be to our collective peril and one of the greatest reasons we need a new president of the United States. Let's speak truth. In America this evening, I don't know what time it is, it'll be shortly, in places around our country, families will sit down for their weeknight dinner, wherein parents will look across the table at their children, elementary, middle, high school students, and ask them, "Honey, how was your day?" To which those children will respond, "Wasn't a good day." Why? What happened? Well, today we had to have a drill where we learned about how we had to go and hide in a closet in case there's a mass shooter roaming the hallways of our school. Why, Mommy and Daddy, did we have to have that drill? To which, of course, the answer is, well, you see, there are supposed leaders in Washington, D.C. who have failed to have the courage to reject a false choice, which suggests you're either in favor of the Second Amendment or you want to take everyone's guns away, failed to have the courage to say, hey, cool, you want to go hunting? That's fine. But we need reasonable gun safety laws in our country, including universal background checks and a renewal of the assault weapons ban. Let's speak truth. And I'll tell you guys honestly, I'm kind of fed up with this issue. I mean, look, you know, some people wonder, well, why is it taking so long? What needs to happen? Well, we all know it's not like we're waiting for a tragedy. We've seen the worst of tragedies. And I don't even need to go down the list with you guys. We've seen the worst of tragedies. It's not like we're sitting around waiting for good ideas. Those ideas have been had. It's about people failing to have the courage to act. So here's what I'm going to say. When I'm elected president of the United States, I'm going to give the United States Congress 100 days to get their act together. And if they don't, I am going to exercise executive power and do three specific things that I will share with you. One, I'm going to require that anyone who sells more than 5 guns a year is required to do background checks. I am going to require that the ATF will remove the licenses from any gun seller who violates the law. And I'm going to reverse what this administration did as it relates to fugitives for justice. They took them off the list of prohibited buyers. I'm going to put them back on that list. That's what we're going to do if Congress fails to act. And it will be within the power of the President of the United States to do just that. And just to put a fine point on it, like on the issue of gun dealers, because I've researched this issue, did you know that 90% of the guns that are used in connection with crime are sold by just 5% of the dealers? We need to crack down on this. Let's speak truth. Let's speak truth that in America today, there are families and parents that have to sit down with mostly their son, sometimes their daughter, when that child turns 12 years old to have what's called the talk, wherein those parents explain, son, you may be stopped, you may be arrested, you may be chased, you may be shot because of the color of your skin. Let's speak truth that in America today, we have a criminal justice system that is deeply flawed, that has been infected in many ways by bias, and that can be reformed. And we should agree that in our America, no young man should fear for the safety of his life because of the color of his skin. Let's speak truth. Let's speak truth. Let's speak truth. Russia interfered in the election of the President of the United States. And let's speak truth that we have a commander-in-chief who on that subject prefers to take the word of the Russian president over the word of the American intelligence community. That we have a commander-in-chief who prefers to take the word of a North Korean dictator over the word of the American intelligence community when it comes to an American student who was tortured and later died. That we have a commander-in-chief that prefers to take the word of a Saudi prince over the word of the American intelligence community when it comes to a journalist who was assassinated, a journalist who had American credentials. And let's speak truth, we can no longer afford to have that commander-in-chief. And I could go on and on with the truths, but I'm gonna close them up with this one. This one, which I believe, especially now, when there are so many powerful forces and voices in our country that are trying to sow hate and division among us. A truth that I believe is not only critical that we speak, but that we know and we feel in our hearts and in our souls. And that truth is this. The vast majority of us have so much more in common than what separates us. Let's speak that truth and know it to be true. And, right. And here's how I think about it. The way that I think about it is what I call the middle of the night thought. You know, some people call it the 3 in the morning thought. Other people call that the witching hour. You know what I'm talking about. When you wake up in the middle of the night with that thought that's been weighing on you, sometimes in a cold sweat. Well, for the vast majority of us, when we wake up thinking that thought, it is never through the lens of the party with which we're registered to vote. For the vast majority of us, when we wake up thinking that thought, it is never through the lens of some simplistic demographic that a pollster put us in. And for the vast majority of us, when we wake up thinking that thought, it usually has to do with one of just a very few things. Our personal health, the health of our children, our parents. For so many Americans, can I get a job, keep a job, pay the bills by the end of the month, retire with dignity? For our students, can I pay off those student loans? For so many families in America, right here included in New Hampshire, can I help my family member get off their opioid addiction? The vast majority of us have so much more in common than what separates us. And so I say, as we march toward 2020, let's hold on to that, knowing that is part of the strength of who we are. Let's reject That's stuff they're trying to sell. People who are trying to say it's us versus them. I'm not buying that. I'm not buying it when people are trying to say, oh, you need to have one conversation in the Midwest, not another conversation when you go down south, another conversation on the coast. I'm not buying that. The vast majority of us have so much more in common than what separates us. And so I also say this. On our march toward 2020, let us remember that one of the greatest strengths of who we are as a nation is by our very nature, we are aspirational. We are an aspirational people. We are a nation that was founded on noble ideals. The ideals that were present when we wrote the Constitution of the United States and all of its amendments, and the Bill of Rights and the Declaration of Independence, and those words we spoke in 1776, that we are all equal and should be treated that way. We are aspirational. We are also clear-eyed. We've not yet reached those ideals. But the strength of who we are is that we fight to get there. And so let's own that strength. Let's own that strength in a way that we fight, knowing what can be, unburdened by what has been. Let this be a fight that is born out of optimism. Let this be a fight that we know is born out of love of country and knowing we are better than this. That's how I think of the task before us. And my final point then is this. This moment in time will pass. And years from now, our children, our grandchildren, others, they will look in our eyes, each one of us, and they will ask us, so where were you at that inflection moment? And part of what we're going to say is, well, there was this one afternoon hanging out at Dartmouth. But what we are also going to be able to tell them about this moment in time, we will be able to tell them more than just how we felt. What we're going to tell them is what we did, what action we took, that we stepped up, that we spoke out, that we organized, that we touched our neighbors and our friends and our family members, and we got people to register to vote. We took them to the polls, and we worked knowing the power of who we are when we are all in this, when we know the power of the people, when we know that the strength of this nation is the people and who we are and what we see and what we know about what we can be. So years from now, we will tell them all that, and we will tell them we won. Thank you.
All right, so let's get some questions for the senator. Let me see, look around. Right there, the glasses.
Get the mic.
Yeah, that's fine. Oh, okay, that sounds good. Hi.
Hi.
So you support...
What's your name?
Hi, I'm Sam.
Hi, Sam. Kamala.
Hi, nice to meet you. So you support tuition-free, I think, public college.
College, yeah.
College,
college.
yeah. Yeah. So how would you help people who have already graduated from college relieve that student debt?
Absolutely. It's one of a big area of concern for me. First of all, just let me say that no student should have to fear the burden of what student debt right now brings. New Hampshire has one of the highest in the country. On average, New Hampshire students graduate with $32,000 in debt. And back to, for example, the issue that I'm talking about in terms of teacher pay. I have met more teachers who left the profession of teaching because they simply could not afford to do the work and pay off the student loans. And on this point, I want that student who might be you, it might be any one of you, who is excelling in science and has a passion to go teach middle school students. I want that you would be able to look out on your future and not be concerned about the student loan debt that you're facing as well as the cost of living, and then decide instead of going to teach a middle school student, I gotta go and join, if I'm a science student, gotta go join a pharmaceutical company. Or if I'm a math student, instead I got to go to Wall Street because I can't afford to teach. So there are so many variables that come with the issue of student loan debt, that one is about just a burden, and a real burden emotionally, psychologically, and financially, as well as what will end up being career decisions that are made simply because you can't pay the bills, as opposed to following your passion and doing what's going to actually contribute to growing our society. So these are the ways that I think about the issue of student loan debt. First of all, yes, tuition-free community college, debt-free college. Next, we need to seriously understand that we've got to let students refinance their student loan debt. So for example, if for students, I don't think it would be any of you, but for students just a couple of generations before, if they took out their loans between about 2006 and 2013, they were looking at about a 7% interest rate. What I am proposing is that would be renegotiated down to 3.5%. So that's one specifically. The other is that we've got to strengthen and actually expand a system so that the repayment schedule is going to be income-based, meaning income-based repayment schedules. So it would be proportionate to the amount of money you are making. The other thing we have to recognize, and this is going to go back to my days as being an attorney general and going after people who are defrauding consumers, is the number of predatory service providers that are out there who are servicing loans, but really in a predatory way that is taking advantage of students. We need to go after them and frankly prosecute them when they are engaged in wrong behavior. And then finally, something that we also need to do just in terms of entry point is simplify the financial aid application process. I mean, all the students here know what I'm talking about. It's awful. It's just awful, and it needs to be simplified, and so that more students can have access and know what they're getting into. So those are some of my thoughts about what we need to do. Thank you.
All right, so I think we have time for one more question. I'm sorry about that, but we're gonna jump in there. Let's see, right there.
Should I speak out? Okay, I'm pretty loud. Hi, I'm Natalia. Hi, Natalia. Nice to meet you. I was just wondering, how do you plan to attempt to bridge the gap between Democrats and Republicans in the Senate and the House in order to get your legislation and your executive powers to go through?
Natalia asked, how do we plan to bridge the gap between Republicans and Democrats to get something done, right? I hear you. Okay, so here's the thing. I will share with you that there is bipartisan work that is happening. I am very pleased and excited to have two pieces of significant legislation that do, I think, some very important work. One, I am sponsoring a piece of legislation that would reform the money bail system in the United States. It is a criminal justice reform issue, and it's also an economic justice issue. There are people in our country that are sitting in jail for days, weeks, months, even potentially years, waiting to go to trial, simply because they don't have enough money in their back pocket to pay for bail. To get out while they're pending trial. It's an economic justice issue. So I've got a bill that would basically change the whole system. And my co-sponsor, somebody, I knocked on his door and said, hey, you want to try and work on this together, even though we don't agree on most of anything? And his name is Rand Paul, a Republican from Kentucky. And he's my co-sponsor, and we're working on it together. And I will tell you that it was great. When we rolled it out, I was like, Rand, how's it going? How are your people dealing with working with me on this? And he said, Kamala, Appalachia loves it. Of course. Getting back to the earlier point, the vast majority of us have more in common than what separates us. Another bill dealing with a very big issue that deals with critical infrastructure in our country and our elections and the integrity of our democracy is election security. So I sit on the Senate Intelligence Committee and Senate Homeland Security Committee. And we receive all kinds of information about the vulnerabilities to our national security. One of the things we know, see earlier part of the conversation, is that we are vulnerable in terms of foreign interference with our elections. So I'm working with a Republican from Oklahoma, his name is James Lankford, and we have a bill that would upgrade all of the states' elections systems. And guess what, by the way, interestingly enough, the most secure way to vote? Paper. You're right. And, and so this is great. Now, it would be great if the Republican leader would put these bills on the floor for a vote, which has not happened, but there is bipartisan work happening. But I will say this also. After this election, it is my intention to bring Congress together to say, we have got to fix some things. Because part of, I think, our collective frustration with what's been going on over the last couple of years is this whole situation has got us staring at our belly button. The world is passing us by. We have critical issues that are being neglected in our country, and we are becoming weaker because of it. Let's be clear about that. Ain't nobody else gonna come in here and fix our problems. If we don't do it, who will? And when we're looking at globalization, when we're looking at the fact that we need to compete on a much bigger plane, we better get our act together. And most of the intractable issues that we must address are not even bipartisan. I would suggest to you they're nonpartisan. But we gotta have real leadership at the top, and that's why I'm running for president. So, there you go.